not multiple.
All right, and we're live. Welcome, everybody. This is the Reality Czars podcast, and we're your hosts, Nate and Tony.
Hello.
We have an awesome guest on. I'm really excited about this guy. We have Rafael Asulin, and he is from Paradigm Threat, and we are super stoked, man. Like, I literally know nothing about what we're going to talk about tonight, and I'm talking to the expert, so I'm super stoked. Ari, do you want to tell our audience a little bit about yourself and where they can find you?
Yeah, I'm a hobbyist conspiracy theorist. I've been researching every conspiracy you name. My website is paradigmthreat.net. You can just go there and see my articles, media, but definitely check out our Discord link, because on Discord we got a community, a couple hundred people, and they research stuff all day, and it's really fun. So check out our Discord.
That's awesome, man. I got to get in there too. That sounds great. Well, brother, we are excited to have you on here. And I've been really curious about digging into Tartaria because it sounds awesome and it sounds legit as shit. And I want to know more. So, and I know that this is one of your areas of expertise. And then you were also talking to me about the mud flood stuff. And that's another thing that I literally know nothing about. So wherever you want to start, let's do it.
Yeah, totally. Tartaria is a term that most of us haven't really heard much, but you will see the term in Wikipedia referencing a type of building architecture, right? Tartarian style buildings. Those are the ones with the old like steeples and pointy tops and really awesome stone carvings, stuff that we can't reproduce today, stuff that apparently the technology has been lost in the 18th century. They have all these Tartarian buildings all over the world. And every continent except Africa. And essentially, it represents this old empire, this world empire called the Roost Horde Empire or Tartarian Empire, which sort of started from the origin of civilization, the very first drama that the human race went through. And it ended with a collapse that basically left all the pieces of the world that we know today. We know this empire today as the Roman Empire, and we know that it fell at some point in the past and left behind this sort of power vacuum that then other people took over, like England. They sort of pretended that they were the empire of the world for a long time there, but we all know that the British Empire, tiny little island, never really had the ability to rule the world. So why does England think it rules the world, or did throughout the 19th century? Why do so many Europeans think that they have like aristocratic lineage, kings and queens that go all the way back, thousands of years, when they don't? The answer is, if you look east, you'll find right away that Russians, for example, feel like a lot of their history has been stolen. Africans will tell you the same thing. A lot of Africans feel like their history has been stolen and sort of appropriated into European history. And so what happened with Tartaria was that in 2014, essentially Russia started releasing all this new stuff, maps and history. But that wasn't the first time that they did it. In 1990, you got this guy called Anatoly Fomenko. And Fomenko is extremely important in the Tartarian sort of investigation. He's like the main guy who figured this all out. What did he do? What did Anatoly Fomenko do? In the 90s, he basically found a mathematical solution to solving redactions in history, solving corruption, rewriting of history, stolen the way that they steal history. He found a way to actually primer and detect it. And he detected that history as we know it, as the Scaligerrian history is taught in schools, is actually a duplicate copy over and over of one single story taught in many different countries and many different dates to make it look like we've had a very long history of many thousands of years, very violent history of many wars that just sort of start and stop for no reason. The history we're taught in school to us today certainly doesn't give us the reasons for these wars. It's just left to us to decide that they must have been caused by human greed and resources and religion. So this Eastern story of Tartaria provides an alternate to the Scaligerrian history that we were taught, and basically tells a shorter and simpler story starting in the 11th century, and proposes that the timeline before the 11th century, we don't know anything about that timeline. That basically human history started in the 11th century, and then somebody in the last couple hundred years decided to add an extra 1,000 years to that timeline in order to push their modern crimes back into the past, to hide the tracks and so forth. He sort of figured this out using math, which is really cool because he never intended to actually challenge history as it was known. But as he was trying to add up the stories, he noticed that mathematically you can sort of create a fingerprint of the order of events of a story and then match it to other stories of the same caliber and find out that they're exactly the same thing. Muhammad, Jesus, these characters might have actually been the same person, and their histories were split. For example, the origin of Jesus is taught in the New Testament, and the violent period following, which led to the Crusades, is taught in the Quran. So it's the same story, but they sort of gave the Muslims the violent half of it, and so Fomenko makes it very clear that that there could be this whole other version of history, and that version of history hasn't been explored or taken seriously in the West. It's been ignored, like everything else about Russia. If you know movies, Hollywood movies, you know very well that since the 90s, there's just been a great deal of Russophobia. So we just don't talk to Russia. We don't believe in their stuff, and they say crazy things, stuff that shouldn't be true. They say like Cyrillic language that Russian's based on is the same language of the Old Testament text, that they can read that text today as a living language. It's not ancient at all. They say stuff like that, and the Westerners say, Pash, that cannot possibly be the truth, and they just don't accept it. So you get what I'm saying. Tartaria has been completely erased from history, replaced by this memory of the Roman Empire, the British Empire, the Spanish Empire. All these smaller versions were actually part of a much bigger empire that fell apart. And we can get into that timeline in a little bit. Any questions so far?
That's just crazy fascinating, man.
Yeah.
I've heard one thing about Tartaria as far as like, it was something about, I'm going to screw this up, but it was something about Napoleon and maybe one of the czars being lovers. Have you ever heard this story?
Wow, I don't. That one.
Okay, and he had to deal with all of these people that were the Tartars. Like, and at that time, you would see this map, and you would see Tartaria right here, and it was like in the southwestern chunk of, I guess, what it was the Russian Empire at the time, and they were. So, anyways, I guess like this whole theory, which I found just fascinating. I don't know if this is true at all. That actually, when Napoleon invaded Russia, it was to actually kill the Tartars and to give that land back to the Russian Empire, which I thought was fascinating. I have no idea if that's true, but I liked it. I was like, that's interesting. So do you have a map to show us here?
Yeah, is that working? Is it showing? I only see my face there.
Yeah,
oh, nice.
I'm adding it to the stream now, and let's go full stream with that.
So this is a Tartarian map released in 2014. Actually, this one may have come out sooner. The point is, it shows Siberia, right? It shows Siberia not at all like it looks today. Actually, it's smaller. It's not even as stretched out as it looks. I believe that's the Black Sea over there. Yeah, it's got to be the Black Caspian Sea, yes. So you can see on a Google map, how far Russia to Siberia allegedly extends on the world map that we know today.
Yeah, right. We have no idea what the map. We
really don't.
Yeah, yeah.
Some parts honestly look like they're stretched still. Don't get me started on the poles, right? But as far as Tartaria, it's simply that the Siberia doesn't look anything like this today. I mean, China doesn't look anything like this. There's no Tibetan Peninsula. There's no Himalayan mountains. It's just totally different. So the modern historians, they say, oh, those map makers didn't know what they're doing, But it just turns out that these map anomalies are actually very common. Sorry, I thought another page would show up here. Oh, yeah, here we go. So India, for example, has these huge Himalayan mountains right here, right? Mm-hmm. And but not in the old maps. No Himalayas. You got India, and you got a lot of rivers, big rivers going up and down, and just no Himalayas, no Tibetan Peninsula. And then
fascinating.
And in the Ganges, right? You got this one Ganges river. That's the biggest river of India. Nothing close. There's no northern rivers at all. But you can see in the old maps that there were. So it's just, you really have to wonder how somebody could have screwed that up so badly? Modern historians insist that these old maps are full of errors by people that didn't know what they're doing. But I disagree, and that has always been the story, honestly, about our ancestors. They always say they're backwards and too stupid to figure it out. So an alternate to that would be, no, this has been completely covered up. But there's just one other question here. What happened to the map? Like, where did the Himalayas come from, for example? So the official story of the Himalayas, of course, is that it's continental thrust from subduction, in the hundreds of millions of years ago sort of zone. Okay, fine. That's cute theory and stuff, but it doesn't really explain the curves, the curving structure that we see here. They have to sort of come up with a curved plate in order to make that make sense. What we do see, well, I won't get into the details there. It's a totally different topic, but okay, yeah. So we don't really know how the Himalayans got there. But we do know that they weren't there before. So the next question is this an anomaly, or do we see the exact same thing, somewhere else? Let me just go ahead here. Any questions so far?
Just do you think that those mountains, did those tie into the mud flood theory?
Yeah, I'll totally get to that.
Okay, that's
so
interesting.
Yeah, another anomaly right here. The island of California. A lot of people know about this one. California is depicted as the island on several old maps. This isn't even the recent Tartaria stuff. This has just been around for a long time. A lot of makers screwed up, but you can kind of look. There's islands in between. It's a lot of detail, and you got San Francisco inland within the main ocean. That's pretty cool. So that doesn't really seem like a mistake to me. It seems like California really was an island at some point, but then today it isn't. And
that's so cool. Right. Because San Francisco, even now, is on the coast, and the way it depicts it there, I mean, it almost has me questioning sometimes where they talk about hidden islands that we don't know about.
Yeah, really. So we all know about the current world map right now.
Yeah.
So right here we don't have Grand Canyon. That should be on there. You can go check out Wikipedia. You can see that there actually is anomalies with Grand Canyon. That not all of the Spanish explorers saw it. That they say somehow they missed it. Earlier European explorers found it, but the Spanish missed it, etc. It's
pretty big to miss.
Yeah, it's pretty big to miss. Exactly. If you look at a modern map of the Grand Canyon, let's see if I can pull it up here.
It's big enough, I think they say, for the Empire State Building to be inside of it and not reach the top or something like that, right? It's that deep.
Yeah, it's a mile deep, absolutely.
Yeah, it's great.
So there's some lightning scars, right? Oh, I'm sorry, I just gave it away. There's some scarring across the Grand Canyon that doesn't look like it came from water. It's crisscross scarring. I was going to get at that if Grand Canyon is a lightning scar, then we might expect to see crisscrosses of lightning, where basically the discharge amplitude crossed because it was too heavy in that region. Now, keep in mind that water cannot cause a crisscross, period. It just can't. You got a river that meets another river, they join. They never crisscross and continue. And for the same reason, an existing fault line could not have possibly caused this either. A fault line would not have caused the river to change direction. It would have caused a fault line is supposed to be a thrust fault in this case, and this is not thrust fault. This is just a straight scar forming. There's no thrust. So anyway, my point is crisscross scarring should not appear in the Grand Canyon, but we see it in many regions, actually in 3 different regions. You can see it across right here too. And so that makes an anomaly. So let's just jump ahead. So my photos aren't in order here.
They're awesome.
Right.
I'm excited.
This is a painting, 17th century allegedly, of something called blood rain. That's just a reddish mud that comes from the sky. But this photo is showing other things too, right? This painting is showing these rays getting shot out of the sky. So the official explanation, this is an asteroid, memory of an asteroid that was so brutal that caused blood rain and made people fall over dead without even being touched, that kind of thing. There's 2 of them, straight off the bat, there's 2 asteroids pointing. Now, there's something else going on here. First of all, these guys clearly, whoever painted this, clearly remember an event where the sky shot something at them and the sky fell with mud. So the mud flood theory, which let me define it really quick, is all about mud appearing throughout the planet and covering up buildings and other artifacts and stuff, anywhere from like 5, 10 to 30 feet, like stories sometimes, and burying these buildings. And then nobody knows why they're buried. Till today, there's no memory of the event or reason for this to have happened. So the mud flood, you can find it all over, America, Europe, even China, but not like Africa, for example, because not many old buildings there. But to solve the mud flood, first of all, you have to determine where all that mud came from and how it was moved. And regardless of how you solve it, you're gonna have to come up with the energy. Where did all that energy come to move it? To push that much mud into the sky and have it come down, that's a tremendous amount of energy. That's like planet scale energy. That's not some small thing. So if it was an asteroid, then we would expect scientists today to basically teach us in school that this is what asteroids do. They cause blood rain and terrible calamity, and that we would look for these things today. But we actually don't look for this at all today, right? We look for an asteroid hitting and causing an impact and creating cloud cover, which then kills the plant life, right? That's not a mud flood. So they're not worried about mud flood, clearly. So this event here is not being told to us. We don't know what this event is. It's very similar to the Tunguska event. You could look that event up. Very scary day in Russia, Siberia, same region, where the sky suddenly opened up, split in half, fire columns came down, tore up the trees, and anyone who was standing there, they felt their skin burning. That's Tunguska event 1909 or 1912, various states. If that event is as described in Wikipedia, why aren't we looking for it today? And why are we saying, oh my God, there could be another Tunguska event? So much worse than a solar flare or even nuclear war, the things that we do worry about, or global warming. So why not the next Tunguska event? If they allegedly happened from an asteroid, then it might look something like this painting. So the point is that real scientists are not looking at any of this at all. Seriously, they're saying this is all superstition from medieval times. We're not supposed to believe it or take it as fact. And everything they said back then is some sort of superstitious illusion. That's basically what they conclude. So we conclude that there's an alternate explanation where, this is, just take it as it is. People made these medias after experiencing these events. So another one, mud falling from the sky. This one's real interesting. There's like this thing happening in the background. Could be rain, but it could also be mud flood. And everyone's just running to the priest. And they're like, what should we do? Is this God? And he's like, of course it's God, you silly people. This is a time when the priest took over again. They're just like, everyone coming back to them because no one had an explanation for this. This really looked like God was mad at the earth or the people or something. So aside from the reason why it happened, let's just go back to that question you had earlier about Napoleon. I say that we have to look for a geopolitical trigger for this event, if it really was either God or human caused. And though I don't believe in God, I can associate that sort of explanation to another cause. For example, somebody pretending to be God and using advanced technology to do so. That's actually very believable, and could have been what happened. So the point is, we're looking for a geopolitical event to trigger the mud flood. This isn't an event anyone wanted to happen. Clearly, left behind evidence.
All world leaders back then too thought they were a god and would tell their people that they were a god.
That was true. A lot of people did that. Yeah.
So if one of them did have superior technology, one of those places, then a lot of those people were considered God, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
That goes back to Atlantean times when you have sort of a Wizard of Oz effect. In Egyptian times when you had the pyramids and the idols spoke to people, somehow it's because those pyramids are energetic. They have telepathic transmission properties. And then moving forward to cathedrals have the word cathode in them. They are electrical cathodes. They absorb energy. So you can have telepathy between cathedrals, not just here on Earth, but between other planets too. So anyone could be pretending to speak through these cathedrals, I am that I am, and so forth. It's not that hard. And then they say, world event's going to happen. This is going to happen on the date 666. Look out for it. And then the event happens and London burns or something. So, they can be very convincing with this telepathic kind of trick and say in a very convincing way, yes, I am God. These priests, these are saints appearing to you, giving you instructions. That's what Joan of Arc apparently experienced. Someone telling her to go to war. It doesn't sound like something that a spiritual, thing would do. It sounds like something humans wanted to happen.
Yeah, I agree.
So, yeah,
Tony, you have any questions or comments?
Well, yeah. So you're saying that the mud might be So you think it's some kind of technology that caused the mud flood?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially if we're not looking for it as a natural event in the future.
Is this just to clarify, is this one event, the mud floods, or is this just like something that happened repeatedly?
As far as I'm concerned, this is the first time it happened. It can happen again. It's one time.
Okay. And I had another question. Do you think, well, I mean, if it is technology, I was going to ask, do you think that the elitists, the people that are in charge of this realm, whatever we're in, do they know what the mud flood was? Like, do they have this knowledge? And are they occulting it? Or do you think that sometimes they're just as ignorant as we are?
Well, you've heard the term deep state, right?
Yeah.
And the idea of the deep state is that it's very deep. And you try to get to the bottom of it and you find out there's more and more layers, 33 layers or 100 layers. And the layers are also of truth and revelation. The people in the middle do not get any truth, not even close, but they are steeped in sort of counter truth. And they believe in the simulated reality they're given all the way up to that final layer. And those guys, they know the truth, but they keep it very close. They don't want anyone to know about it.
Fascinating. Okay. I've heard of this, the miracle at Fatima.
Yeah, 1917, we got these cargo cults like all over the world, and they're praying to the sky to come and drop them cargo. I mean, what is that? We also have the story of the Exodus in the Old Testament, which is exactly the same story. It's 40 years wandering the desert, the same thing that happened in the mud flood. Mud flood event was 1816 to 1860, allegedly, around 40 years. And it's at the whole time, life on Earth was just dying at a rapid rate. Like I said, this is not an event anyone wanted to happen. It was a sort of an accident that was brought on by too much warfare. And I'll get into that last. But in the meantime, the rulers of Earth, had no choice but to save people, save the survivors. The chosen people, promised them deliverance. We've heard these stories before, and they've eventually delivered them to the promised land. Anyone who is chosen is called an Israelite. That has many times in history. And Israel means one who wrestles with God. It's just the definition. And so therefore, these chosen people were wrestling with the God that chose them. Why? Because that God wanted something back, actually wanted a lot of things back. First of all, Mosaic covenant. No shit. Every Abrahamic religion in the world has to do a Mosaic covenant of the 10 Commandments and everything that comes with it, and the Abrahamic covenants. That's circumcision, baptism, all that kind of stuff. They wanted these cargo cults to essentially worship whoever did this event as God all the way into the future. So that sort of is a lot to ask of a cult, but that's why they are cults, because they sort of kept it going, weeded out their the people who didn't agree, this left them out, and they died of starvation and neglect. If you want to look at the play Oklahoma, the very early example of a cargo cult, that play has everything in it. Has the cult excluding one of the members because he wasn't good enough, has a train coming, and they all dance to the cargo. It's all in that play, actually. And it's an example of the Wild West having been created entirely out of cargo cults, not wagons or any of that stuff. Sure, people used wagons back then to get between the train stops, but when the trains came, those trains came with orphans. And these orphan trains, you can look them up, they spanned all of America, they spanned all of Europe, they spanned through China. The orphan trains are why you see so many people with the same, last name like Smith and John, without much link to their European ancestry. All kind of sort of cuts off about 200 years ago. So you can look up the orphan trains. That's not a conspiracy theory. It's well known. These trains sort of repopulate America as we know it. I think I have a picture of that somewhere. But yeah, any questions about that?
Just little ones, I guess. I have heard of the orphan trains, and I heard this actually tied to, like, I guess what would have been considered like the Great Reset at the time, around the late 1800s, early 1900s, right? Is that associated around the time with these orphan trains, or is it before that?
Yeah, 19th century. You'll find orphan trains. Pretty much late 19th century and early 20th century. That's
when they were like basically rewriting our history for us, right? They were giving us.
Sorry, I took it forever. So yeah, help wanted children. Company of homeless children will arrive. Use them for labor. You can train them whatever you want. Here's a picture. Orphan trains 1920. Sorry, just not in order here.
Were people trying to get rid of orphans, or were they trying to import orphans for labor?
Well, one big question, which I haven't fully answered yet, is why did you get so many orphans? Like there must have been
where the parents.
Yeah, those must have been quite a slaughter in the 19th century there. That'll be preceding the mud flood. After the mud flood. And again, you can refer to the freaking Exodus story. You don't know what happened because they pushed this story into the Exodus. The Israelites, they didn't all agree with the plan. And at some point, a great deal of them had to be slaughtered. Why? Because they refused the Ten Commandments. Now you look in the Old Testament, how many Israelites were slaughtered? It was like 80 or 90% of all of them. It was like a huge amount. And with all those adults gone, I guarantee that there was going to be a ton of kids left over in the rest of the Exodus story reaching Israel, the promised lands. So that story is a blueprint for what happened. And it's happened all over the world. So basically what I think happened was if the adults went along with the new plan, they would go and be part of this new world. But if they didn't for any reason, they were just slaughtered. They was exiled into Siberia and just lost their kids. So yeah, I got some pictures of this, but it's what is written in the pictures. It's real interesting. Go ahead.
Was there any particular location where these kids were coming from, or were they just all over the world? Was there like a big area maybe that, like, where were they installing like this reset where they were asking the parents, like, you're either on board or you're dead? Was that here in the United States, or was that in Europe or Russia? Or
I don't know how many of these orphans were shipped overseas because there's no evidence of that. They all followed trains, and there weren't many trains, that went overseas yet. I know that's true. So this is just what happened in every continent. Even Australia got orphan trains there too.
Okay, so this was going on simultaneously. Yeah,
right.
gotcha.
Somebody who's not me basically says that it's a common mud flood theory to suggest that these orphan trains were about repopulating the earth. And we can just assume that because they're all orphans, that their parents didn't come along, they're trying to reset their ideology too, Forget everything that they taught you, every last thing your parents ever taught you. Children's Aid Society, yep. Okay, I think that's all the photos of the children, yep. So, go back to something else that was interesting. Ring of Fire. You got all this, these locations on Earth that allegedly have volcanic activity. But a lot of those volcanoes are not active today. And in these regions, we basically... well, let me get to their photo here. Sorry, I went to the wrong picture. Okay. Let's skip that and let's look at some more of these. It's a mud flood photo right here. Yeah, it's a really obvious one.
Wow.
Like, how did that happen?
Beautiful building.
Like, yeah, exactly. Got beautiful buildings under mud. Like, what world existed in the 18th century that was covered up?
Well, and you can see it too, where it looks like maybe that second part, if you go back to that photo, if you see that on the right, that looks like a huge chunk of mud on the side of the building. And maybe that staircase was built new, after that to incorporate that.
It could be something else. Like they say, they could explain this one correctly, but there's a lot of ones that they still need to explain. A much more obvious one is when you find underground windows and doors, because there's just no reason for them to be built. That's not a great photo. Let me find a better one. In Jerusalem, in the old city, they basically find underground ruins all the time. Something buried these ruins in the past. They built Jerusalem on top over it. See those? Oh yeah, nope, that's a fake one. The statues in the Easter Islands.
That's something fascinating. I didn't know that until pretty recently, like maybe about a year or two ago, that they have a torso. I just thought they were all heads.
Right. And the interesting thing is, like, what happened to the ones that are sideways? Did they really bury them sideways on purpose? Or was it like a lot of mud that was sort of like rushing in, pushing them or something?
Yeah.
You got underneath the White House, of course, a lot of people have seen this photo. You got a much bigger White House, and it has the shape of an old church. White House used to be a church before it was burned down originally.
Interesting. I did not know that. I've never seen that photo before. That's really cool. Do you think that underground is still accessible? Do you think they have tunnels underneath there?
Oh yeah, it's in the movies actually. They show some of it in the movies.
And what's in that?
That's where they ship the kids, Tony. That's where they move them in and out.
Honestly, I think that they couldn't really erase evidence of these things in the past. They're just too buried. They have enough agents around that could bury it and shut up. This is something that was left behind. So underneath the White House, you have tons of secrets. I don't doubt that for a second. And in fact, underneath DC and Virginia in general, I'm sure there's a lot of people keeping those secrets till today. Here's a more obvious one. You got under the street level, somebody built arches like on purpose. Maybe it was like an underground subway in the old days or something. I don't know, but these photos have to be explained. That they're considered mud flood photos until they are explained. This big obvious one here, like arches and windows, more arches. And there used to be a place called Lemuria. No, that's a theory that there was a place called Lemuria. But what is known for sure is that there used to be an entire Asian pirate sort of like the whole Asian pirate thing in Asia was there in the 18th century, and then boom, 19th century, it's gone, as if the British totally wiped them out with the British fleet. That's the official story.
I've heard the official story, and
right.
it's a fun story.
Yeah, but that would mean that the British really went from all the way over there and killed all of the pirates and all of this. Forget about it. So something happened to those pirates and this region in general. Yeah. Right now we just have islands left behind, but it might have been more land in the past. Another example is New Zealand, which used to be a place called Zealandia. I wish I could just go in order with these photos. Oh, there we go. Perfect. So Zealandia, underwater continent. Like for sure, it's a continent because it's continent size. But for some reason, it's underwater. And again, nobody knows why. No one can explain it. There is, in my theory, where the mud flood was caused by an assault on Earth by a weapon. The idea was to sort of destroy the enemies, but also to prevent them from ever being able to regroup. If this region was particularly threatening, then they would carve out these islands so that they weren't islands anymore, that they're underwater, unlivable. You couldn't, dock there anymore. And then you got Australia nearby, this continent that has no record before the 18th century. I mean, unless you believe the French and Germans. This place that was recently populated by the British. And you got this place next to it called New Zealand. So it's just like there might have been an old Zealandian continent that got carved up in the mud flood and dumped into this new continent, Australia, right next door. And all that's left over is this little tiny island. So the British just called it New Zealand. That makes sense to me. The official explanation that the British found it in the 17th century doesn't really add up to me. Let's see what else we got. Let's get to the theory itself. Why the mud flood happened. Essentially, you're asking earlier about Napoleon, and I believe that the Napoleonic Wars absolutely. Don't mind if I'm flipping through. I'm just going back. Napoleonic Wars, if they trigger this event. So let's see if I can go back to that part. Sorry, 1 second.
No worries. These are for all of our listeners. You guys should definitely go over to Odyssey and watch this video when we post it, because there's a lot of really cool stuff on here. And for the folks, this will also be on Twitter and on YouTube, and unless YouTube takes it down. They've been taking down our videos a lot lately. So
oh yeah, I believe it.
Yeah, we don't count on them.
Yeah. So here's an old painting, 1797. Oh, totally said that backwards. It's Vlot van Saint Malo. And he painted in Napoleon's times these paintings. And so the first question is, what are they? Are they imaginary? Official explanation, yes, imagine them. But another explanation is that these airships actually existed in the 18th century and could take 15,000 troops at once. So that's not just like exaggerated.
Awesome looking.
Right. And so what is it? We got these fans here, but fans wouldn't work. It wouldn't take that much weight, especially so something else. Anti-gravity technology existed in the 18th century. It wasn't widespread, and it was sort of suppressed even back then. Why? Because it was going to be released in a war as an instrument of war to guarantee victory. This has always been the case. Every war in history, you name it, I'll tell you the technology that was introduced to change that war. So airships and advanced cannons were a thing in the past that is now being suppressed today. They say you cannot do this stuff anymore. But in the Napoleonic Wars, the French troops crossed the Alps, which may have existed back then. Officially, they crossed the Alps into Russia. How could they have done that by foot? These short French soldiers weren't that rugged from Western Europe. So the official explanation of the Napoleonic invasion of Russia in 1812 doesn't all add up. But if you throw in advanced technology, yes, it does. These guys were going in to they're taking advantage of this technology by height, by amplitude, and they're just going to take out the old Roost Horde Tartarian Empire without any resistance. That was the plan, as you guys mentioned earlier. And what revenge was this? Why did they do this? Why would the French suddenly be rallied into this and unsuppress their technology? Because this is the end of a long European religious schism, starting 11th century, going all the way up to the Napoleonic Wars. It has to do with Christ. And Christ, as a real historic figure in Russian history, was their first emperor. He traveled. Yeah, he's called Andronicus Christ. He wasn't called Jesus, and J isn't a letter in Cyrillic alphabet. So it was just called Christ, which means anointed. It just means he was special in some way. What was that special way? It's very simple. It was his mother was virgin birth. Not unique, does happen, but still, it's made him stand out in the culture that was part of. He was part of. Shunned his mother, and she had to go from Crimea, where she was from, where their family lived. Sorry, she was from Kathia, but Crimea is where their family lived, and they're driven out of there, and they had to go to a stable nearby Turkey. So Turkey at the time was Jerusalem 1. It was the first Jerusalem on earth, and Jesus went to Turkey, had the whole crucifixion thing happen, the whole New Testament story is true. It's just redacted, like I said, stolen history. And this guy went back to Russia, where he came from, and sort of founded an empire. This empire was founded mostly on the memory of the crucifixion. You see the crosses everywhere. These crosses represented sort of a schism between East and West, where East believed in polytheistic old world religions, many gods, and the monotheists of the West were trying to convince everyone that there was one God. So anyway, that's the religious schism of Europe, and the Crusades continue, where Istanbul, Turkey is taken, Jerusalem is taken by the Rus Horde Tatarians, and then later in the Reformation, the Westerners build up a lot of resistance technology and sort of start the Jesuit expansion all over the world and back into Russia, redacting that old Christian religion into something new. The Jesuits went to Hindustan, and they redacted the Hindu religion into Buddhism, as we know today, and spread Buddhism. They went to America and tried to convert all of the Native Americans who were not monotheists, of course, into monotheism. You look them up; they're called the Praying Indians. These are the ones that were converted by the Jesuits. And this Jesuit plan just sort of took over the world, 16th and 17th century, under Louis, leading up to Napoleon. But right before Napoleon, there was this French Revolution, this 10-year moment when everything in the plan went bad, when all of the aristocracy, those people that said this whole time that they represent God and you need to believe us and stuff, were literally being dragged out of their houses and killed in the guillotine. This French Revolution left a major power vacuum. People no longer trusted aristocracy, and they wanted somebody to take over. So Napoleon sort of took over, turned the whole plan on itself, freed the world. I won't get into why or how, and sort of invaded Russia in order to end the war. In my opinion, the War of 1812 was successful, and Napoleon must have successfully reached Russia and conquered it. And in official history, you can look it up, Napoleon lost 600,000 men trying to get into Russia without ever once encountering the Russian enemy. Crazy, not realistic story. They allegedly went to the Kremlin, but the Kremlin was burned down by the Tsar, and so they couldn't find any food. This story makes no sense. Armies don't act this way. They're very well provisioned. So the 1812 war is the biggest war of all. It's more important than World War I or II. It was the first World War. It involved America and it involved Europe. Historians will insist that there were two separate wars in 1812, that the American war between Britain and the colonists had nothing to do with the 1812 war between Napoleon, French army, and the Tsar of the Russian army. But the French Empire had a huge colony in America. They took half the continent. It's called Louisiana, stretched all the way to the West Coast. There's no doubt that the French were involved in the War of 1812 in America and in Russia. They're attacking Russia from both sides, from east and west. And as a result of Napoleon's victory, the deep state, which has existed throughout antiquity, they had no choice. They had to do a reset of an extreme proportion. And that's where I get my mud flood energetic event theory. I think that it was actually caused by humans, and these humans live on Mars. Mars is a planet in our solar system that is inhabited by humans. If you look at 19th century literature, you'll find tons of it that reference humans on Mars, especially from Vatican priests and Protestant priests too. Like all religions knew about men from Mars, sometimes hostile, but usually visiting for benign reasons. So if that literature is true, just like these paintings and stuff, if they're true, then we have to factor in humans of Mars into world history and see where they may have had influence. And that's where I get my theory. They must have triggered the reset in order to reassert control of Earth. They had to do this. They had no choice because Mars is a place with poor resources and there's no cows, there's no milk, there's no abundance of good, there's not much fruit, and there's difficulty in reproduction. There's just problems. It's not a real planet. It's sort of a leftover of Earth in primordial times, and they are dependent on us for resources. They had a choice in the past to sort of share technology and all that, but for whatever reason, they chose to continue to suppress technology and choose the path of domination. I think the resets have happened in 100-year segments. 1812 was the first one. 1912, no doubt, was another reset. Titanic, World War I, all that. The Great Depression, look into the Great Depression, 120 million Americans died. It's so much bigger than even the Holodomor or the Holocaust. And then in 2016, we were experiencing 14, we're experiencing like almost World War III, like someone's trying to reset right now. They have all this yet working, and we feel it, but we also feel that the plan has failed. Like it's not working the way they wanted. Too many people must have been aware of it. Like Trump, for example, he wasn't a person that did anything. He was part of the plan. He was just like Napoleon. He was born and raised for this to fail and take America down with them. But someone somewhere, like the U.S. Army, decided, let's turn the plan on itself. And the plan has continuously been turned on itself. The Abrahamic Accords absolutely are stopping the war in Russia right now. It's not going to be any more war because the Abrahamic Accords are forcing all of the Muslim countries, UAE and so forth, and Israel, to sort of negotiate this immediately. They're not going to take one side or the other. I can go on all day. There's a lot of things that they did in 2018 to prepare for what was about to happen now, and it does seem like this is going to end positively. We're not going to see World War III.
I really hope you're right about that, Ari. That sounds awesome. So I had too many questions.
Yeah.
So it does really feel like currently, right now, the time that we're in, we are due for, it's on the nose. The World Economic Forum is literally calling it the Great Reset, and it does feel like they are trying to, and they're just out and out openly lying now. Like we had an episode earlier where we were talking about how these people in the media, they are out and out saying things like, well, it may not be factually true, but it feels true and it meets our narrative. And so we like this. And I'm like, you guys are just saying the quiet part out loud. Like we always knew you were lying, but now you're just like, it's just wild, man. And, so I was curious about where Napoleon. So Napoleon, when you were talking about Napoleon Bonaparte, was he part of that Jesuit New World Order, or he was like an anomaly fighting back? Well, I kind of got lost in that.
Yeah, he's not special at all. He's just like Hitler, who wasn't special, and Trump, who wasn't special. They were simply raised in the deep state garden, which, if you take that terminology, it means like all of our celebrities, our politicians, our leaders of any kind of leadership. Are raised in a specific way, separate from us by bloodline, by territory, by money, you name it. And we're not allowed to interact with each other. That's how the deep state prefers it. So when they have a president come out, like when Trump randomly wins in 2016, it was planned 30 years ago that he would. And you can get the proof of this by looking at our predictive programming in the media. Like, I got Simpsons showing right here. Simpsons has showed us so much stuff that later comes true.
Man, it's wild.
Yep. And everyone's like, "Oh, time travel." Like, that's not time travel, man. That's a plan. These guys have a plan, and they're aligning us with a plan. It makes it easier. It's called revelation of method, the strategy, and it basically allows us to identify the resistance early. So if we watch these things and we have no resistance, then by the time it finally happens, if anyone says it's happening, then they'll say, "Oh, what you mean? Like in that sci-fi movie? That's science fiction. That's not real."
Mhm.
Everyone the onus will be on you to sort of prove that science fiction is real, and it's just very difficult to do that.
So my next question was something around the lines of at one time. So you said that there was a religious schism that separated the East from the West, right?
Yeah.
At one time, were they united? Had they been united?
No, they're never united. And this is
Okay.
I can say this very confidently because I believe that the force in this world who is attempting to push monotheism from that Western side, from the Jesuits, the Reformation, the victims of the Inquisition, those people, like that fire never extinguished. That monotheism had never gone out within those old churches and stuff. They kept it going. So at that always existed. At the same time, in the East, people always believed in polytheism because polytheism is based on real stories handed down to people directly. Like remember when Prometheus showed up? Prometheus is actually a story of the last close encounter with the planet Mars. This is during the origin story. The planets are moving around. Saturn Cosmology explains it. And Mars is going through these 9 final contacts with Earth. Every last contact is very violent. Mars strikes us with lightning and red rock. But we can see up in Mars's atmosphere that its inner layer is being scarred by lightning as well. And the inner layer of Mars, which is currently today the outer layer, happens to be the same color as the liver, the human liver. So the Prometheus story didn't come out of superstition. It came from people seeing the event in the sky and saying, Mars, Prometheus, has taught us how to use electricity to build these cathedrals to survive this. And he stole the power that used to belong to Zeus, the old savior god. Why? Because the church told us so. The church says all technology belongs to God and you're not allowed to touch any of it. So when Mars showed up and gave people directly the knowledge of how to harness or protect themselves from major lightning storms, that story of Prometheus stayed in the minds of millions of people, billions of people all over Earth, and was very hard to extinguish. So when Jesuit monotheism spread and converted all these races over, they redacted these stories as much as possible to the point that they got people to believe that they aren't real, that they're fairy tales, that they never happened. Greek mythology, Norse mythology, etc.
Interesting. So I'm curious. So we have the Martians over here. I'm going to put them up in this category. No one can see me, I guess. There we go. So we have the Martians up here. We have Tartarians down here, and we have the Jesuit order here. How do they connect? Is one coming from the other? Like, do the Martians, can they still contact us now? Are there like flying ships that they can actually come down here? Or was this only when our planets aligned that they could actually interact with us? Or
well, here's how it works. Every 36 months, Earth and Mars go through opposition, where they bump up against each other electromagnetically. Of course, we're still very far away, but the electromagnetic fields of the planets stretch out 100 times as far as the size of the planet, the diameter. So when Mars and Earth bump during opposition, that's a time when you can fly between them without having to go into the inner solar system, which let me just tell you, you cannot fly in the inner solar system. The sun will destroy your ship. You need an electromagnetic field in order to survive out there. So you're going from one safe field to another with a UFO or whatever. That I heard it takes 15 minutes, but there's a better way, a much more unexpected way, and that's quantum teleportation. Quantum teleportation, which apparently has existed throughout our history. You can find it in Atlantean technology, in Egyptian technology, and the Old Testament references. And I believe that absolutely exists today. That's what I think CERN is. You got CERN, this huge collider project, which is the most expensive project on Earth in human history. And yet nobody knows what it was built for, because the hypothetical physics it's trying to achieve were never proven. And now in the future, they still aren't. So you could say CERN was a huge waste of money, hugest waste of money ever. And yet it's actually a very unique object. CERN, a particle accelerator, is capable of gathering a tremendous amount of energy, a huge quantity of energy at like planet scale. And when it gathers that energy, quantum physics tell us that it has to flow to the path of least resistance. And when it does, it creates a quantum entanglement between those two locations. The more intense a amplitude, the stronger the quantum entanglement. With this entanglement, if you got CERNs on both sides and both planets running during opposition, you can teleport people and everything else too. So yes, I do believe that they travel here all the time. It's much more difficult though. If you're born on Mars, you don't want to walk outside on Earth. We have very strong immune systems here being close to the sun, and they have very weak immune systems. So they basically do not come out here. We do not see them. In fact, in my opinion, I think they live in those weird buildings you see in San Francisco with no windows. You know, those buildings that like the ones in downtown, like there's one or two that has no windows at all anywhere in the building, made of concrete. Those things are so freaky. They probably live in those. It's the only way they can avoid the sunlight.
Why do they go there to begin with? Like
why they come to Earth or why they go to Mars?
Or like why do they come to Mars?
Well, here's the sad part about the deep state. You know, they're not inherently evil. You know, they don't represent the devil or anything. But their story starts with the fall of Atlantis. And when Atlantis fell, they were the top of the world. They called themselves the tree of knowledge. Everyone had to come to them for anything. And they could do anything. You know, they could use those crystals, those emeralds, to store memory and play it back, to teleport and to fly. And of course, gravity was much less back then, so flying wasn't a big deal. They were on top of the world, and Atlantis was at the top of Mars. Why? Because Saturnian cosmology, you got collinear configuration of planets, and at the north pole of Earth, if you looked up, you would see Mars, and then behind that you see Venus, and then Saturn, and behind that Jupiter, behind that the Sun, all in one collinear configuration. Mars was the highest place that you can get to and still stand on the ground. Any higher than that was Venus, and Venus is made of plasma, and there's no rock there, so you couldn't stand there. So anyway, Venus, Saturn, that was considered heaven. Couldn't go there. Mars was the highest place, and the most energy transferred through the North Pole of Mars at extremely high amplitude but low voltage, very safe energy. It's like a place of experimentation and just, fantasy. So these people, when the collinear configuration came apart naturally, they took the fall really hard. All their technology stopped working. Their Atlantis empire literally fell into the North Pole of Mars, into ruins. The other parts of the empire, like on the North Pole of Earth, also ruins. Everything was destroyed. And it seems to me that they had a choice back then to sort of share that technology with Earth, or to easily take advantage of the survivors of this coming dark age and say, you guys got to come to us for everything. Got these stories back then of people sacrificing humans to altars. We don't know why yet, but it does line up with this explanation. Maybe the deep state was controlling humans by saying, if you want food, you want heat, technology, you're going to have to do exactly what we say, even kill each other if we tell you to. So
it's
anyway.
Unfortunate. It seems like humans have always been that way, and they still are. Yeah.
Exactly. And ignoring that story, you could just look at ancient Egypt, which apparently was the first major slave empire on Earth. It had all of the qualities of a slave empire, which is where circumcision and baptism come from, where you have to do these things to maintain your slave status. Otherwise, you're thrown out of the cult and you do not survive. So after that, the fall of Egypt was also natural. It was this one event where Jupiter ejected Venus out of the center of it, and Venus streaked across the sky. It was called the Angel of Death, and it proved to the people on the ground, that the priests did not know what was going on, that they can't predict any of this, that the god wasn't one thing but multiple things. A lot of proofs all at once visually. So ancient Egyptian empire falls apart. Everyone just leaves it. Deep state goes into hiding yet again. You can see that they keep getting defeated over and over by nature. And at this point in the future, say 17th, 18th, 19th century, the deep state, what's left of them, still on Mars, because they were there the whole time, breakaway human civilization. They got cut off for a long time. And during the last 600 years, all they've wanted to do was reassert control. So you can imagine that they had to wait a long time to reassert control and get those resources. It wasn't a whim. It wasn't an act of evil. It was an act of desperation of another planet having to do this to get, resources, essentially.
Very interesting, man. There's so much there. So I have, probably too many questions here, but so let's say, do you think that all human life started on Earth, and some people kind of broke away, like those top people, maybe those Atlanteans, they were shooting for Mars and they found a way to transport themselves there? Or where do you think the human life originated?
Well, in Norse mythology, which describes the collinear configuration, you got 8 realms, like 9 actually, and each realm is inhabited. Each one has different environments. The Earth realm, which is Midgard, is called Midgard because it's in the middle. It's in the middle of something. It's also called Middle Earth, right? In Lord of the Rings, we hear Middle Earth. I thought that meant Hollow Earth, but no, actually it means in the middle of a collinear configuration, something we couldn't imagine, something that has entered fantasy. But anyway, Earth was Midgard, and other places like Jotunheim, for example, was really cold place with giants, and Asgard was the highest place you can get to, top of Mars, brilliant, beautiful castles and all that, emeralds. So each place was inhabited in Norse mythology, and that means in our earliest record of human history, every one of the planets was inhabited, except for the ones that you couldn't stand on. So the confusion, though, of Norse mythology is that they weren't describing planets; they're describing realms, and that means that because they were so small, they couldn't possibly know what they were standing on. They just saw the landscape, the horizon of each realm. So 2 or 3 realms can represent a single planet. So you see my point. All realms were inhabited in the origin story, and after the collinear configuration, essentially each planet had to vie for itself. Mars was still inhabited by humans and other life forms, and planets are hollow, by the way. So most of life, congregates inside. We don't see that life on Mars now on the surface. It's on the inside, where the only place you can survive.
Interesting. Okay. All right. And then I wanted to ask again a little bit about, I guess, so we have the Martians, and now we have the Atlanteans. Are they tied to Tartaria? Did Tartaria come out of the Atlantean?
Well, here's the story.
Yeah.
When Christ showed up in Jerusalem, he was a giant, a big, hairy giant of the Roost Horde Empire, not depicted at all like you see today. And the Europeans were tiny; they're small guys. And there was this first contact kind of situation where the religious priests, the rabbis of Istanbul, Jerusalem, were trying to teach this giant how to be a rabbi, and he was learning their stuff. He was being converted by them, just like Jesuits would do later. And he didn't like it. He said, look, you don't have to do that. You can do this instead. I don't agree with usury. I don't agree with blah, blah. He called into question a lot of stuff. He made parables and so forth and said, these parables more or less how you should live your life. And the Istanbul rabbis disagreed. So they crucified him. I don't believe I died in the crucifixion, period. I don't believe that story is true at all. He was a giant. They were trying to make an example of him. He carried the cross with him, which meant it was cooperative. So they made an example of this giant. This is how he punished, people who blaspheme. What did they accuse him of? Being the next savior. Why? Because the rabbis were looking for next savior. They had a record of saviors until then, from planets like Jupiter and Venus, which they called Joshua, and Zeus, which was renamed to Moses. Has the word Zeus in there. So they were looking for that next savior, and it was never going to come. No more planets, no more cataclysm, and they just arbitrarily accused this giant of thinking he was the next savior. I seriously doubt that Christ said anything like that. It just wouldn't make sense. He was crucified for all the other reasons. He was threatening the religion completely. He was breaking up monotheism and calling into question everything, the taxation and the sort of ghetto lifestyle that the Europeans tend to live in. It's all ghettos and people owning people and stuff, which is totally different. In Crimea, you got this big old wide open land of giants, and a lot of the early beautiful, temples and like things like the Kremlin were built there first. So this guy gets crucified, and he leaves, goes back to the east, why you find records of Jesus in the east in Japan. There's a tomb of Jesus in Japan. You got Buddha in China, of course, which mirrors the story exactly. You got Muhammad of the Ottoman Empire. And then in America, you got the Mormons. And the Mormons say, hey, Jesus was here too. He probably crossed that Bering Strait when it was land. He's a giant. He's a big guy. Could walk around. And he just came and had a second revelation in America. It wasn't dead. He didn't come back to life. He just walked there and gave it. That makes more sense to me. So the Mormons.
So did he survive the crucifixion? Really?
Oh yeah, I definitely believe so.
Okay.
I don't take any stock in the coming back to life and visiting America thing. That doesn't make sense. And like I said, there is a tomb of Christ in Japan. You can look it up. Like there's some reason the Japanese believe that Jesus was buried in Japan. So
That's really fascinating.
Right.
Yeah, I'd love to visit that. Yeah.
Right. So basically, Christ, Andronicus Christ, his name, goes back to the Crimea, and everyone just sort of rallies around him and says, "This guy, look what happened to him. Look what they did to him. We're gonna, make a religion out of our eclectic sort of indigenous belief systems." And they did. They created the Roost Horde Empire. Within 10 years, with a couple hundred years it took to build it, but within 10 years, they organized enough of an army and went all the way back to Turkey and conquered Jerusalem. This is known as the Crusades. It's also known as the Trojan War. Anatoly Fomenko insists that both the Crusades and the Trojan War are the same war, and he gives all this evidence to back it up. Essentially, Jerusalem was this big, tall castle with 3 ramparts, identical to Minas Tirith in Lord of the Rings, totally same build, and each level was meant, to defend if the next level fell. This whole building was built to fend off giants. These Europeans were afraid of giants, and they were arming themselves against them. So
how big are we talking when say giant?
At least 3 to 4 times the height of the humans, like really big.
So up to like 18, 20 feet?
Yeah, I would say.
Okay, that's fascinating. And
Right,
do you think
people.
that are the giants human?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay,
it's different scale.
Because I love digging into the whole Nephilim, the whole that sort of thing. Okay,
Nephites, right? Because Nephites entered the Mormon Bible too. They got references to giants. So the story goes: this empire forms under the revenge of the crucifixion. It's called the Crusades, and the people who represented Christ take revenge on the people who allegedly crucified him. In Scaligerian official history, we were told that the Crusades happened 1,000 years after the crucifixion. Like they waited 1,000 years to take revenge, which makes no sense. In this Fomenkian chronology, makes perfect sense. Happened within 10 years. They got an army enough to take that rampart, but they lost a ton of people in the meantime. You got famous stories of people like Achilles, who they say was a giant, and how he finally fell in Troy. So moving forward, they take Jerusalem back from the infidels, and they impose a sort of vassal state on them, the first vassal state of the empire. They say, "You guys belong to us. We're going to charge you taxes. You're going to bring us some of your children for our army." All of that Roman Empire stuff you've ever heard started in that moment. Now here's the crazy trick, the thing that I don't even think these Russians even understand today, and that is that the Rus Horde Empire, when they had this Christ figure who called into question all of this European usury, they then, in revenge, they just copied all of it. They did exactly the same thing. They went and they imposed usury on their slaves, their vassals, and they said taxation and and all that kind of stuff. So the point is, it seems to me that the deep state, which went from Egypt to Turkey, and when Turkey fell, they sort of convinced the Rus Horde Empire to become like Turkey was, violent and army-like and usury. And the Rus Horde Empire saw no reason not to. They're like, yeah, we're the victors, sure. And so the deep state moved to the Rus Horde Empire. It's the reason why this empire was created, why it got so big, and why it attempted to enslave the whole world. Not right away. The first 100 years were actually 160 years were really peaceful times. Rus Horde Empire.
Yeah, I've heard certain things about Tartaria, and so I think there's probably several theories, right?
Right.
And I've heard that Tartaria was actually like a very peaceful empire.
Yes, at first, yeah.
At first, okay.
And so they sort of gave back the lands that they conquered. This is the Alexander story. He didn't really change those locations, and for 160 years that worked out. But what happened in the West was you got these monotheists who basically felt like they were conquered, who don't feel like they agree with the authorities, and they sort of rebelled. You got rebellions all over the place, and it turns out that a lot of the rebellions took the shape of Christian orgies. Sounds crazy. You go to Italy, and you go to that one town near Mount Vesuvius, the one that was the Roman city that was destroyed by Vesuvius, you will find phallic statues on the streets, giant ones, like 100 feet tall phallic statues. It's not just some shape that someone liked. It was a sign of the orgy locations. Fomenko goes into great detail of these locations, say that orgies back then happened out in the public. Of course, the Roman Empire has this memory. We do know that. And what happened was they started experiencing diseases after a couple hundred years of that. Not that doing orgies is a bad idea, but that too many foreigners got involved and it sort of reached this peak and became a problem. This problem,
was that on purpose, you said?
Not this one. This was just
overindulgence,
because these guys were being told the whole time by the Roost Horde Empire to knock it off, and it didn't. But here's the thing: the Roost Horde took advantage of the situation in the worst way. History remembers this period after 160 years as the Ottoman Empire, their invasion of Europe. They go in and they slaughter all the Christians. Absolutely, they do. Why do they do this? Why does the Roost Horde Empire slaughter these locations? Because the venereal disease got to the point that people started to treat others like not human at all. Sort of like we had recently with the pandemic. Like, oh, don't touch me, and go deal with this, and I'm not going to that town. It was the first time that people really got frightened into this kind of thing. The Roost Horde Empire sort of slaughtered everyone that was sick, everyone that showed any signs of being sick, and they reimposed their control again. They said, let's try this a little differently. From now on, Christianity is going to be quite a different thing. It's going to be like the opposite. It's going to be totally austere, and it's going to be modest. No more sex at all. We're not even going to talk about it anymore. That kind of shit. It's going to be totally opposite. So Ottoman Empire imposed this on Europe at that time.
All right, I had a quick question. Yeah. Where do so we're talking about the West now, and we're talking about they were Christians. So is the East? So you're saying that Christ came and started that Eastern Empire, right? He was the first emperor. So what religion were they? So, and where do these Christians from the West, where do they tie their religion from? Do they tie it to Christ as well?
Well, this is why I say that the Russians and the Easterners say that their religions were stolen by the West, because they say that the Jesus story was in Crimea, it was in Russia, and the Westerners say, no, it was in Palestine, totally different location, desert where no one lives. And so that's a schism right there. We don't agree on where Jerusalem is. We don't agree on where Jesus was born. So, so you're asking the Western religion, why would I call them Christians? Well, when the Roost Horde Christian Empire spread all over Europe for the first time, when it was peaceful, it spread the religion, the Christianity religion. It was very simple, parables of what Jesus said. The monotheists, they rejected that. As you know, the rabbis in the Old Testament rejected Jesus, didn't say he was not the savior, and led to his crucifixion. So these rabbis represent that rebellion group, that the people that resisted the whole time the polytheistic Roost Horde Empire's authority. And and eventually, when they started saying Jesus came from Palestine, they also said something very important. They said Jesus is the King David bloodline, the King David bloodline. And that bloodline has nothing to do with Russia at all. That bloodline is a hypothetical narrative that started basically by those monotheists, that they are part of a chosen race coming from Palestine. And that is, like I said, a very different version of it. It's potentially stolen. So back to topic.
Okay.
So back to topic. The Christians of the West, they only became Christianized in the Reformation. Reformation is a time when Western Europe changed the nature, the very fundamental nature of what Christianity is into what it is today. And they claimed it essentially at that point. In the Reformation, they said, it's our religion, it's not yours. And that's when the Roost Horde Empire had to start the Inquisition, another event we've heard of. Now we're told the Inquisition happened in Spain, and it was between Europeans. Actually, in Fomenkian chronology, the Inquisition is absolutely from the Roost Horde, from the east, going west into Europe. And they're trying to stop the monotheists from literally starting wars. Joan of Arc style. These monotheists were receiving orders from somebody, and they're told to do everything from guerrilla warfare to straight up, let's go and raise armies and take things. So as this kept happening, the Inquisition attempted to quell the witch burnings and the hangings. Why was that happening? Well, that was happening on its own. The witch burnings were happening because there was a lot of people, men and women, receiving telepathic messages to betray their own people. It entered in the Quran. We hear these stories as the jinn or the genies. These are supernatural beings that offer humans great wealth and power if they betray their own people. And for this reason, the Europeans started like burning people. They're like, "How dare you betray us or try to betray us? You know, your God isn't even real. I'm going to burn you and prove it, etc." So this stuff started happening all the time, and the Inquisition basically was a response to it. Inquisition gets a bad name. They think that they were violent or something. Actually, the Inquisition doesn't have much violence in it. It was trying to prevent violence, and it failed. The Inquisition completely failed. The Reformation was successful and sort of won the narrative. They played the victims, said the empire was the emperor no clothes enemy. A lot of anti-empirical propaganda came out with the Jesuits, stuff that we're sort of raised on today. And that's where we lead up to Napoleon's time, when Napoleon was part of this major plan to take out Russia. They're basically going to conclude that ancient war. Those monotheistic Jesuit Reformation, both the Protestant and the Catholics, and I could prove this because in the War of 1812, Protestants and Catholics joined in the fifth coalition against France. So the Protestant Catholics don't really have a schism; they're identical, and yeah. So anyway, that's why you basically had this Jesuit expansion in the world. They took advantage of this taking out of the Rus Horde Empire, taking over its power, all of its locations where they originally established their religions, taking those religions over, redacting them into something monotheistic and tied into the central church.
So do you think that the Jesuits, do they really believe their religion? Are they devout people, or is this about power and control?
Well, the Jesuits are absolutely about power and money and control because they have they have military branch, they have financial branch, and they're connected to the Masons, connected to everyone of any kind of significance, all the secret societies you've ever heard of under the Jesuits. Because the Jesuits were there first, they were there early, and they're the ones that converted everyone over.
Fascinating. Okay, that's really interesting. Yeah, I've definitely heard that. I've heard the theory, at least, that the Jesuits are really what's going on top. That's who's running the show. Okay, that's really fascinating. So now we're going to get into what the mud floods were, like an attack, and who did it. So was this the Jesuits that were taking out the Tartarians, like they were trying to just squash them completely?
Well, the Jesuits were planning to do it slow and go by converting people over, by sending missionaries. This was a totally new strategy for its time. It was very convincing. You're sending basically children off into the middle of war, and the enemies end up laying their guns down. It worked pretty well. The problem is that after a lot of flattery and convincing, and here's some new technology and food, and aren't we so small and pretty? Because the Jesuits were white and they're small. They're going to these far remote regions where you had giants and a lot of black people in Africa, and specifically Egypt. So I'm going to mention in Egypt, you had this ancient Egyptian empire, which the deep state fled. No one wants to live there anymore. It's hot and it's a desert. But the slaves of that empire still maintain it not to this day, but until Napoleon's day, there was still a pharaoh there. It was possibly even Cleopatra or somebody related to her. I don't think that name is real. It just means praise fatherland. Anyway, the Egypt was filled with black slaves left over from the Egyptian empire when all the white people fled. And when Napoleon showed up, all these white people, they basically said, here's all this stuff. They integrated and kind of converted them over. But then they said, B, your old god is back. The old god that you guys remember in your stories, Osiris, is back. Jesuits, I believe, are the ones that built that Sphinx. They rebuilt it. And the Sphinx is a sign of the old god coming back together, being one form. Where in the story of Egypt, the old god Osiris was torn into 3 bits and thrown into the Nile or into hell. And that means that the Egyptians remember their old god coming apart, the planet's configuration coming apart in ancient times. There's no reason for them to believe that god returned, but The Jesuits told them they did, and the black slaves of Egypt had no choice but to accept these Jesuits represented that old god. It's a really nefarious trick, and it's so much more effective than warfare or anything else that the Roost Horde Empire could do. So the Jesuit plan was going to be successful. It was 100% likely to work, and I think that the only thing that could possibly make it fail was to be turned on itself from within, from a very high level, and that's Napoleon, and that's the French Revolution. That's where everything went wrong, essentially.
Interesting. So I have another real quick question. So we're jumping way back. So I was really fascinated when you were talking about the Atlanteans, and you were talking about how they had all of this technology, and that basically the rest of the world would have to bow and scrape and come to them if they needed something, right? And then you said at one point their technology just ceased to work, right? So is that something, was the energy that they were using, or was that have something to do with the cosmology, and then maybe a shifting in the sky is what, and things up there, is that what ended their power source? Or
essentially, because that was the origin of this current solar system. When Earth was being born, along with all the other planets, it happened all at once in Saturnian cosmology. Saturn was a L-type brown dwarf, which was a big plasma shroud with many layers of plasma floating in space with matter in the middle of it. That plasma shroud basically connects with the sun at the moment of the origin story of time, essentially, and that the planets get ripped out of Saturn and form a straight collinear configuration which rotates around the sun without shifting. So this time, this period, this golden age, it was called and remembered, had so much energy passing through it that essentially it was completely different from anything we have now. Let me explain how different. Death was impossible. You couldn't kill anything back then because the energy kept you alive, essentially. So things passed between life and death, sort of, as part of their life. There was no. You get the point. Animals did not eat each other, according to the Bible, according to Hindu texts, according to Norse mythology. No animals or mammals ate each other yet. There's abundant fruit. It was everything we didn't need to eat. Was my point. This energy kept you alive.
The Garden of Eden, is that describing Atlantis, or parts of it, or that timeline?
The Bible doesn't talk about Atlantis. It just mentions the tree of knowledge, which it doesn't describe. And it's associated with the tree of life. Okay.
I felt the tie-in because they, like, at that point, the animals didn't eat each other and we didn't eat the animals and things like that, right?
Right, exactly.
Okay. That's
how different it was. Okay. And then pretty much after the fall of the configuration, all that energy went away and suddenly everything had to eat to survive. And that's when the animals naturally decided to start doing that. We believe that mammals today have been eating each other for billions of years, right? But the mammals, the predators, are actually going extinct. All of the predators going extinct in the 20th century. That's a fact. So something has to explain that these predators probably haven't been predators for very long. Maybe only for a couple thousand years, I say.
Okay. And then you might not have an exact answer to this, or you might have even said it and I'm just stupid. But in what you see as the timeline, how long has it been since the Atlantean time? And using what we consider a year, like how far back do you think? When was this Atlantean golden age?
If a year is as long as 365 days, I think the golden age started just over 4,000 years ago.
Okay.
But because years became smaller and smaller the further back you go, it's recorded as more like 6,000 or 7,000 years.
Okay. Okay, cool. Okay, so now are we digging into the mud flood?
Yeah, you bet. Let me
awesome.
grab a photo here. Here's a picture of some kind of flying object catching on fire. Could potentially be
crazy
during this
looking
event.
thing.
Right, yeah. Could eventually be during this event when things caught on fire. There's a term for something burning. It's called faggot, right? The word faggot means a pile of sticks that's burning. But this word also is used derogatory sense against people of a flamboyant nature. Now, French people were known to be quite of that nature back then, no doubt about it, especially the way they dressed. And when they all went down in flames in the Napoleonic Wars, no doubt they did, that term might have come from them going down. They were all burned, all those FGTs. So it's just an interesting sort of side theory that I have there.
Interesting.
Let's get to something we haven't seen yet. Okay, I got these mountains in China, right? The Rainbow Mountains. Painted.
Yeah, they're beautiful, man. And actually, where I'm at in Oregon, there's they call them the Painted Hills. Yeah. There's these really beautiful mountains out there. Yeah, that so look similar.
Yeah, geologists say this happened from billions of years of layers of sediments, as if different colored sand laid on top of each other over billions of years, and then was all shifted in a thrust fault. Straight off the bat doesn't make sense because most of the tectonic action of natural history theory occurred at the beginning, the first couple billions of years of Earth history, and then the last billion years you basically had all the sedimentary layers and everything else. So this is the wrong order. This thrust fault would have had to happen before the sedimentary layers. So getting away from natural history, what else could have caused this? Well, in the lab, and especially if you look up the Sapphire Project, you have these scientists reproducing sort of primordial conditions in a lab. They're seeing what electricity does to sand, to dirt, to glass, and they're able to reproduce all of this. Lightning scarring, dendritic patterns, alchemic patterns, which is where it changes color because the nature of the atom or molecule is being changed. A lot of modern scientists say that alchemy is also superstitious, nonsense. But back in the Roost Horde Empire, they were convinced that, if you add phosphorus and mercury together, that you get gold and silver. That this was just known, and they called it the Philosopher's Stone. So it's just a matter of if you believe that or not. If you do believe that, then all of money as we know it, the gold standard, fiat, all of that is called into question because whoever's hoarding that gold knows gold can be created. You can invent gold. But if you're to believe the periodic table, which insists that gold is an atom, cannot be created or changed, then the value of gold and dollars will be what it is today. So yes, I do believe that they could just be lying and that gold and silver and diamonds are all things that you can make in a lab and have no value at all.
How cool would that be if we could learn alchemy and we could do all kinds of really interesting stuff, man?
Oh yeah,
yeah, it's so fascinating.
It would so much improve our technology, our health, everything. It'd be a different world. On the ground, you find all kinds of patterns, especially in the West Coast America, that are not explained by geology. You say you're in Oregon.
That's beautiful.
Have you ever gone to Utah or Arizona?
I have not gone to Utah or Arizona. No, I've heard Utah is really beautiful. I'd love to go to Utah. Check out Mount Zion and that area.
Right, and even in New Mexico, you got these shapes that just cannot be explained by modern geology. They say, it must have been some kind of weird volcano, which decayed in a certain way over time. But
do you think that those were buildings? Do you think those were attempts? Oh, okay.
Now these the West Coast, it does seem was lightning scarred in the past. This is not related to mud flood theory, but here we go. In the electric universe theory, you can find many of the scientists describe the West Coast of America having been lightning scarred in antiquity. They say that many thousands of years ago there was some sort of secondary coronal discharge that sort of jumped from weak point to weak point in the areas that either were too dry, too much sand, like a desert region, or too icy, like snow regions. And these areas were essentially concentrated hard by this discharge of energy. According to this theory, the energy came from planets interacting each other in primordial times. And that's fine. I totally believe that. That's why you see a lot of scarring on Mars and on Earth. However, the Grand Canyon is completely unique. You don't see a Grand Canyon anywhere else on Earth. And you see Grand Canyons all over Mars. The negative discharge lightning scarring that occurred on Mars occurred all over its surface. but only one place in Earth, and that means that potentially that secondary discharge that could have created the Grand Canyon might not have occurred in primordial times. I know it might be hard to understand that, but it's because we would have expected to see, if it really was a primordial event, to see Grand Canyons in China, in Egypt, Africa, those places, which are more or less identical ecosystems to Western America. So back to the point, Western America, definitely lightning scarred. If you go to Utah, if you see, I try to find it. Oh, okay, it's right here. You're gonna find all kinds of red rock, right, in Utah. Red rock, shouldn't be there. It's alchemically modified sands. It's changed its color, and it's not just the rock, but it's not just the sand, but the rock structures themselves. They're very reddish, and they're sort of cylindrical, and they shoot up into the air. Let me see if I can find one of those here. These structures are not explained well by modern geology. So what I'm saying is that lightning scarring, tremendous amplitude, basically melted the ground and sort of turned it into plasma, like molten plasma, in these dendritic shapes, like tornado shapes, and they sort of, there we go.
And is that what the mud is? Is the mud the plasma?
Well, let's take a look here. In Utah, you got these shapes right here. These are melted rocks that sort of mushroomed on the top. This cannot be explained by mud falling on top. It would just fall to the sides. Cannot be explained by geology, period. This feels like the highest level of these rocks got the highest intensity of discharge and literally melted. So it's not the only melted rocks photo I can show you, but you'll find these photos all over Western North America.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's really beautiful. And
right.
It's like kind of breathtaking.
I agree. I got way better photos, just not in order, like I said. Let's see if I can get to them real quick. Oh, here's another one. The Electric Universe, check out the Electric Universe project for a lot of these theories. They've pointed out that these canyons on Mars have dendritic patterns. They're not just random canyons. They actually show repeating patterns on them. So these patterns, dendritic, means that they take sort of this shape, dendrils, like a leaf or a river delta, and that they're repeatable. They're repeatable at amplitude and so forth. So anyway, that's sort of a giveaway that these mountains were scarred by lightning, not by water. And we find the same dendritic patterns on Earth. Here's another good example of patterns that could not have been formed by geology, because you see like swirling and wavy patterns, as if the ground sort of eased on one side or stretched or,
Yeah, the only other theory that I've ever heard that tries to explain a lot of these different things. Wow, that's beautiful.
Right. That's what I was looking for earlier. Really beautiful and just, like detailed sort of carving there.
Yeah, that's insane. The only theories that I had ever heard of, and I think this was like, what's his name? Something Carlson. Anyways, he was trying to explain that he thought a lot of this was from actual, what the heck do you call those things? Not icebergs, but giant glaciers that were moving across.
Right.
Yeah. And that's fascinating. That's really interesting. And he thought that had something to do with the Ice Age, and then something. And I don't know if he can really explain what it was. Something that just like, I think maybe he thinks that it was an asteroid that just melted everything like super quickly and just shoved and moved these glaciers and created all these crazy things. And that's his explanation.
Right.
And I find that really interesting and fascinating too.
Yep. Here's a shot of the Grand Canyon. Like I said, if there was an explanation for it, expect it to happen on the other side of the planet too. If it was a glacier or an asteroid, you expect to see more of them, not just one. Here's a nice shot of it from the angle. You can sort of see that this not really a river's direction, but more of a filling out space. And when you fill out space,
looks like somebody cracked the Earth like an egg. Right. It's crazy.
Essentially, when you fill out space in repeating patterns, that's dendritic. That's not something rivers do. Rivers do snaking and random patterns. So it looks more or less snaking and random at the large scale, but like I said, smaller scale, repeating dendritic, especially in these regions right there. Let's see. Devil's Tower. another structure that they cannot explain. So they put it in like sci-fi movies because it's so mysterious.
Where's that at?
That's in it's either New Mexico or Utah. I'm pretty sure New Mexico.
Okay.
And look, Australia got this melted mountain here, totally melted, really obvious. I mean, there's no other mountains around. It's like what happened, not explained by geology well at all. Oh, there's top view of the Grand Canyon. Yeah, it's easier to see sort of how it's it's just like a random shape, not due to water, but because of the random direction of an uncontrollable secondary discharge.
It reminds me of a human
continent.
skull.
Nice.
the little patterns. That's fascinating.
Totally. What else we got? Okay, I think we saw them all. Yeah, there's a dendritic pattern in glass. It's reproduced in a laboratory, so they can do this stuff in labs with sand and get exactly the same results as we see in nature. That's kind of cool. Like in Lexington, Kentucky, my friend lives there. I just told them, hey, do you realize that underneath Lexington, there's like a whole other city that's been buried and nobody in Lexington knows about it or teaches it in schools? And he's like, nope, never heard that one. I mean, that's what our American history is like. It's all buried and nobody talks about it. The Roost Horde Empire stretched over into America. There was a advanced civilization here. And for some reason, the authorities want us to believe that the Native Americans were sort of sticks and stones Native Americans, with pots and clay pots and rivers in Buffalo and just sort of living indigenously without technology. They left behind all of these ruins and these cities, magnificent Tartarian buildings. They definitely were advanced.
What I'm really fascinated about, and I want to check out one of these days, is there's a lot of underground here. I'm pretty close to Portland out here. And there's a lot of underground, and there's just crazy stories about it, and I'd love to. And there's a lot of buildings now. Like I have friends that work in a lot of these buildings downtown. Almost all of them have underground passageways that you can, that are all underneath, and it's really cool.
Yep. So here's a one last thing we could cover. This is a burial mound. You can find giant burial mounds all over America. Not anymore. They've been destroyed. This is called the Smithsonian Cover-Up. For some reason, the 19th century Smithsonian Museum decided to collect all of the giant bones that they could find all over America and destroy all of the sites, bulldoze them all. They're all gone. Now, these bones, they don't just put up in museums. They reclassify them as dinosaur bones.
Yeah.
So let's look at these mounds. This one is one that is still around today, and they said this is what it looks like, that they weren't giants, they're just regular humans, and they buried themselves in such a way. I think it's very odd to explain it that way. We don't see this burial tradition anywhere else on the planet. Native Americans tend to cremate, and Europeans tend to bury, and Egyptians were all about the burial. So what is this mound here? Let's look at another one. Here's the Serpent Mound, I believe, Georgia. They believe that there's several mounds here that were deliberately built in the shape of zodiac positioning and in the shape of a giant snake. This one, they agree officially that there were giants, but they say these giants were only 8 or 9 feet. They don't want to admit they're much bigger than that. Here's another example of a mound. They think like people buried in layers, just doesn't make any sense. And they also buried with their tools. We constantly hear this, that they're buried with their tools, that they found tools in the burial mounds. So now let's take a look at this one. This burial mound doesn't seem organized at all. We find the human is buried here. We find their tools and objects, and then we find their livestock was buried with them. But their livestock was buried at a weird angle and not in any kind of organized way. And why do that? Why bury the livestock with the person? Now consider the mud flood event. If this person was buried all at once, then we would expect this exactly to be how it would turn out. It's not a burial mound at all. It's just they're buried.
Yeah. This really reminds me of what you brought up. I guess Vesuvius, right? Where, and there's that classic photo of the guy that was just having a go at himself, and he got caught and was preserved, and he will be like that forever, for all time. Yeah,
I've heard that. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a funny photo, man. You can look that up.
Yeah. For a while there, I wasn't sure what to make of that story, but I believe it. I think it's really hard to fake that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Cool, yeah.
Okay. So who did it?
So who did it and why, or just who?
Yeah.
Um, the deep state did it, and the deep state represents any attempt to control humanity. It's not in our nature to do that, and it's not 99% of people that are involved. The deep state is a very small, select inside circle. They are nepotistic. They marry in family-wise to everyone that they connect to. They don't allow it to happen outside the family, period, which tells us that leading all the way up to the deepest parts of the deep state, that this is all just a big family thing. They're only loyal to their families. They're going to keep it going because nobody in their family can stop it or say no to the ones that are in charge. And finally, I come from a Jewish background, a Jewish family, and I just experienced this a lot in my life. Communities like this do not really have much empathy for people outside the community. So it is important that the deep state is born into a religion that is very different from the religions we know, that they're sort of our cattle and that property, and that they're never going to engage us as real. We are, as people, they are, that they own us by the letter. That's how the British Empire set up. It's how the American Empire set up after the Civil War. They sort of created that social security system, the early stages of it, and they made everyone property of the state. It's still a conspiracy as to whether or not that's provable, but I don't see any reason to doubt that theory. And I didn't describe that theory very well, but I forget the name of it. But yeah, the idea is that the deep state is very nepotistic. So who they are, it goes all the way back to the center. It's just the families that lived in those regions. Mars, maybe inside of Earth, Hollow Earth, possibly in other planets too. I heard that humans can live inside the sun, that they probably live inside Mercury, that heat doesn't work the way we think it does, and that those regions are very scarce on resources, that they need Earth to get everything from food to the reproduction, everything. So deep state simply represents the need for humanity to try to control itself, to deliver resources to those who are in charge.
Okay.
Really fascinating, man. We're a little bit past an hour and a half. I know my wife is stir crazy. So Ari, we loved having you on. We'd love to have you back on, and we'd love to dig deeper. Yeah. Thank you so much, brother. Do you want to do any last minute plugs or any shout outs?
Check out paradigmthreat.net. That's all the stuff on there. And I'll be trying to make a video. I'm trying to make a mud flood video. I've been working on it for about a year and a half. Life events put it all off, but within the next month or so, I'm going to try to record a video that really explains my mud flood theory. And so look out for that.
Awesome, man. We really appreciate your time, man. Thank you so much.
Absolutely, guys.
All right.